My mother ripped my graduation photo off the wall, in front of 136 guests. My father handed me an invoice for $1,100,000, representing every cent he spent raising me. My sister laughed as she snatched my car keys because my father had secretly transferred the title to her that morning. They even brought my boss to the party to fire me publicly, while I stood there in silence. They thought they were destroying me. They thought they were cutting off a dead limb. They did not know they were actually signing their own eviction notice. My name is Olivia, and I am 29 years old. Welcome to Narratives by Nora channel. I'm behind the wheel today, and as I drive, I can't stop thinking about how some roads and some families simply lead to dead ends. Where are you listening from right now, and what's the time? I'll dive into your comments as soon as I pull over. For now, let's get back to Olivia sitting at that cold plastic chair in her own home. I sat on a cold plastic chair at a small folding table, tucked away near the kitchen doors. The clatter of dirty plates being stacked by the catering staff was the only soundtrack to my 29th birthday. Across the grand hall of our Palo Alto estate, the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the suffocating weight of old money. I watched my sister, Emily, radiant in a designer gown that cost more than my annual rent, basking in the adoration of my parents, Kenneth and Patricia. For 10 years, I had been the ghost in their machine. As a data architect, I spent my nights in the shadows, silently fixing security protocols and patching lethal backdoors in the family's investment platform. I did it without a salary, working 80-hour weeks to ensure their tech empire did not collapse into a pile of securities and exchange commission violations. They thought they owned my life, but they only owned my daylight hours. In the dead of night, I was a high-level independent consultant for their biggest competitors, earning a six-figure income they never saw. While I patched the van systems for free, I was building my own fortress of wealth in the shadows. I thought I was being a loyal daughter. I thought if I worked hard enough, they would finally see my worth. Instead, Kenneth stepped into the spotlight, holding a laser pointer like he was closing a multi-million-dollar venture deal. A massive screen lowered from the ceiling, displaying a slide titled Portfolio Analysis. On the left was Emily's professionally retouched headshot, labeled Asset in glowing green letters. On the right was a grainy photo of me at 16, frizzy-haired and exhausted, labeled Liability in jagged red font. Beneath my face sat that staggering number, $1,100,000. I realized then that I had fallen into the trap of normalized cruelty. In families like mine, the victim's labor is not seen as a contribution. It is seen as a baseline expectation. They had spent decades treating my talent as their birthright, convincing me that my existence was a debt I could never truly repay. They did not see a daughter. They saw a utility that had outlived its shelf life. My mother, Patricia, marched over to the only acknowledgement of my existence in that house, my data security certification. She ripped it off the wall and ground her stiletto into the paper, tearing my name in half. "You are nothing but a coder we tolerate," she hissed. But my silence in that moment was not a white flag. It was a strategic assessment. For years, I had lived in a house that was a prison without bars, bound by the invisible chains of a survivor. I had learned to navigate their toxicity the same way I navigated a broken database. Every insult they hurled was just more data for the ledger I was about to balance. They thought they were deleting me from the family. They did not realize I was the one who held the master encryption key to their entire world. I did not reach for a tissue. I reached for the pen. My brother-in-law, Trevor, stepped forward, adjusting his rimless glasses with the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he had just won a game I was no longer playing. He placed a thick, stapled document on the folding table. The title was printed in bold, clinical capital letters, Voluntary Disownment and Debt Settlement Agreement. "It is a standard quitclaim arrangement," Trevor explained, his voice projecting the rehearsed authority of a corporate attorney. "Sign this, effectively terminating all legal familial bonds, and Kenneth and Patricia will graciously forgive the $1,100,000 you owe them. A clean slate, you walk away with zero debt, and we walk away with the assurance that you will never return to beg for a handout." I picked up the document. Trevor had been thorough, but he was a corporate lawyer, not an architect of systems. He did not understand the structural integrity of the Vance empire. He did not know that my status as a blood relative was the only thing stopping the bank from calling in $5 million in commercial loans. He did not realize that by legally defining me as a stranger, he was handing me the detonator to a bomb he was currently sitting on. I looked at my parents. They were watching me with arms crossed, waiting for the breakdown, the begging, the tears. But my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and the account was now empty. Love was not a bond anymore. It was a subscription I was finally canceling. This was not a tragedy. It was a divestment. Where do I sign? I asked. My voice was a flat, horizontal line. I uncapped Trevor's expensive Mont Blanc pen. The click echoed in the sudden silence of the hall. I signed my name with the boldest, clearest strokes I had ever written. I slid the paper back to Trevor and stood up. "Make sure you keep that document safe," I said, my heels clicking on the marble as I turned toward the exit. "It is the most expensive piece of paper you will ever own." Kenneth laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that followed me through the crowd. "You are threatening us with what exactly, Olivia? You have nothing. No job, no car, no money. Get out of my house." Kenneth was too blinded by his own ego to realize a simple truth. While I refused his salary, my private patent royalties were the silent engine keeping his credit score alive. He thought I stood in his shadow, but in reality, I was the one holding the umbrella that kept his empire from being washed away by debt. To him, I was a liability. To the banks, I was the only Vance they actually trusted. I did not flinch. I walked out into the cold Palo Alto rain, the heavy oak doors thudding shut behind me, sealing the light and the lies inside. I hailed a taxi, and the moment the door closed, I pulled out my phone. I did not open a photo gallery to weep over what I had lost. I opened the secure administrator portal for the family office server. I typed in a 6-digit passcode, the date of my high school graduation, a day they had missed. A small loading bar appeared on the screen. System reset initiated. All guarantor links severed. Admin access revoked. For 10 years, I had been the keystone holding up their world. I had just pulled myself out. Inside the mansion, the music was still playing and the champagne was still flowing. They were dancing on the deck of the Titanic, toasting the iceberg they had just struck. While my family was busy toasting their triumph, I was back in my safe house, watching the digital architecture of their lives begin to deconstruct. The first pillar to crumble was Emily's social media fantasy. She had posted a selfie behind the wheel of my Audi, captioned, "Finally took out the trash." Seconds later, the car's smart system issued a security alert. My remote immobilization sequence had initiated. The engine cut, the doors deadlocked, and the air conditioning died. Emily was trapped in a luxury greenhouse on the side of the highway, while the GPS sent her location straight to law enforcement. Kenneth thought a forged signature on a title transfer was enough to make the car Emily's. He forgot that the vehicle was financed solely in my name, and any transfer without the primary debtor's consent is a fraudulent conveyance. In the eyes of the law, the car was still mine, and Emily was just a thief caught in a high-tech trap. To the smart car, she was not a sister. She was a suspect in a grand theft auto case. At the same time, my mother, Patricia, was attempting to maintain appearances at a luxury bistro. She dropped her black titanium Centurion card onto the tray with her usual arrogance, only to have the waiter return moments later with a face full of pity. "Declined," he whispered. Patricia did not realize that for 20 years, she had not been swiping her husband's money. She had been swiping my credit score. I had reported the card as no longer authorized for family use at 9 in the morning. Patricia never bothered to check the account ownership. She assumed her status as a Vance gave her a God-given right to spend. She didn't realize she was merely an authorized user on an account backed by my personal assets. The moment I severed our legal ties, her prestige became nothing more than a piece of useless black titanium. The primary cardholder, the sole bearer of that liability, was me. She had just bragged about kicking me out, only to find I was the one paying for her lobster salad. Then there was Kenneth. He was in his corner office, staring at a screen that had turned a jagged, pulsing red. $12 million in venture capital was currently locked behind an encryption wall he could not penetrate. The Vance core system he used to run his company was not family property. It was my intellectual property. When he signed that disownment paper, he triggered the kill switch. Without me, his tech empire was just a collection of expensive monitors, displaying encrypted gibberish. This was the reality of their power. It was an illusion of the empty wallet. People like Kenneth and Patricia often confuse having with being. They believed their status was a permanent trait, failing to see it was actually a lease, paid for by my labor and my assets. Their position in society was a facade, supported by a keystone they had just kicked out. When I stopped financing their respectability, gravity simply took over. My phone sat on the counter, vibrating incessantly. 36 missed calls, dozens of texts shifting from rage to confusion, and finally, to a frantic, trembling fear. I did not answer a single one. For 3 decades, I had been their emotional support animal and their private ATM. Today, They were going to learn how to listen to the silence. The invoice Kenneth presented at the gala for $1,100,000 was the masterstroke of his own undoing. My lawyer, Grace, sat across from me in a quiet office, her expression as clinical as a surgical report. She pointed to the material change clause in the corporate bylaws I had drafted years ago. By billing me for my upbringing, Kenneth did not just insult me. He legally reclassified our relationship from familial to commercial. He had essentially issued a bill for services rendered, and in the eyes of the law, I was no longer a daughter, I was a third-party contractor. I also made sure to forward that invoice to the IRS. If Kenneth wants to legally define my upbringing as a taxable business service, he'll have to explain to the auditors why he hasn't declared that $1 million revenue or paid the back taxes on it for the last 2 decades. He didn't just hand me a bill. He handed the government a reason to ruin him. This change in status triggered an immediate termination of the family use exemption for my data security patents. The tech empire they built on my back was now running on stolen property. If they wanted to keep using my code to manage their $12 million in venture capital, they would not be doing it for free. My new rate was $5,000 per hour, with a 40-hour retainer paid up front. Then the door opened, and my great-grandmother, Eleanor, entered. She looked smaller than I remembered, her frame thinned by a battle I did not know she was fighting. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she said, her voice a quiet but unbreakable rasp. She had maybe 6 months left, and she had spent the last 3 getting her affairs in order. Eleanor revealed the moral clause tucked away in the 1999 will she had authored. It stated that the Palo Alto estate was a sanctuary for all descendants, and any heir who unjustly exiled another would immediately forfeit ownership. By disowning me, Kenneth had not just kicked me out. He had legally evicted himself. Eleanor took my hand, her grip thin but strong. For years, she had been the silent watcher of the Vance family, trapped between the hope that her grandson Kenneth would find his conscience and the cold reality of the monster he had become. Her silence had not been indifference. It had been the patient gathering of evidence. She was the ultimate guardian, waiting for the deadline of her own mortality to force the final hand of justice. I realized then what my life would have looked like in a world without Eleanor. Without her intervention, the family's exploitation would have escalated until I was nothing but an exhausted data point, a ghost in their machine whose spirit was completely eroded. I would have remained a liability in their eyes, a bottomless ATM for their vanity, while my own career and soul turned to ash. Her rescue was not just about the house or the millions. It was about preventing my total erasure. As the weight of the truth settled over us, I knew the tech legacy was no longer Kenneth's to claim. I was not done counting their sins. I sat in my new office at Vance Capital, the space smelling of fresh lilies and aggressive success. I watched a secondary audit flag an anomaly in the patent registry. Trevor, in his desperate attempt to look like a hero to Kenneth, had made a fatal error. He had not just tried to legally exile me. He had tried to clone my digital identity. I found 3 separate documents where my digital signature had been forged. Trevor had attempted to transfer my core encryption patents into his name to prepare for a fraudulent $12 million IPO. I did not call him to confront him. I did not give him a chance to delete the evidence or beg for another family discount. Instead, I compiled a digital dossier titled The Clean Ledger. It contained 3 gigabytes of encrypted metadata, forgery logs, and transfer records a roadmap to prison with Trevor driving the bus. I sent it straight to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. This wasn't my first contact with the authorities. I'd been working as an anonymous whistleblower for 6 months, feeding federal agents fragments of the puzzle. This digital dossier wasn't just a report. It was the final decryption key they needed to turn a long-standing investigation into a direct strike. The trap wasn't set today, it was only sprung today. A criminal twist is the ultimate kill shot, because it removes any remaining path to redemption. They were not just ungrateful, they were criminals. The elevator doors slid open with an expensive hush, revealing the wreckage of the Vance dynasty. Kenneth and Patricia shuffled in, looking like survivors of a natural disaster. Kenneth's Italian suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat, his eyes bloodshot from a night of drinking copper-tasting beer. Patricia was hiding behind oversized sunglasses, her mouth slightly open in a perpetual state of shock, clutching her bag as if it contained the last of her dignity. They did not look like the masters of Palo Alto anymore. They looked like beggars living in a castle built on their daughter's credit score. "Olivia, please," Kenneth gasped, his voice a wet, ragged rasp of desperation. "The bank. They are taking everything. The sheriff is at the gate. We slept in the Audi last night. Do you know how humiliating that is? We are your parents." I did not stand up. I did not offer them a seat or a glass of water. I let the silence stretch for 60 seconds, forcing them to feel every tick of the clock. I wanted them to understand that their time was no longer valuable. Finally, I slid a thin manila envelope across my black marble desk. "I am not suing you for damages, Kenneth," I said, my voice cold and devoid of pity. "This is an unlawful detainer. I am formally evicting you from the property." I pointed to the exhibit attached to the complaint, the deed. "As of 9 o'clock yesterday, you are classified as unauthorized squatters. I didn't just show up with a hope and a prayer. I had quietly purchased the defaulted mortgage from the bank months ago and secured a court-ordered summary judgment for immediate possession. This wasn't a sudden whim. It was the final, irreversible step of a legal foreclosure they were too arrogant to see coming." Trevor trailed behind them, but the sound of heavy boots followed close. Federal agents in windbreakers burst into the room. They did not look at my parents. They walked straight to Trevor, informing him he was being arrested for felony fraud and forgery. As they led him out in handcuffs, his tie gone and his face hidden in shame, Kenneth reached out a final, pathetic attempt to grab my hand. "We are family, Olivia." I pulled back, looking at him with the clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. "I do not have a family," I said. "I have a ledger. And yours just hit 0. I signaled my assistant. Take them out. I have a company to run." 6 months after the gala, the tech legacy had relocated from a 10,000 square foot estate to a 2-bedroom walk-up that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and regret. The walls were paper thin, forcing Kenneth to hear every argument his neighbors had about money, which was ironic, considering he no longer had any money left to argue about. He sat in a recliner he had found on the curb, drinking a generic brand of beer that tasted like copper. Patricia was in the kitchenette, trying to heat up a frozen dinner in a microwave that sparked every time she touched it. She was wearing a tracksuit she had bought at a thrift store. The silk and the designer labels were gone, sold to pay the security deposit. The door opened and Emily walked in, looking like a digital influencer who had survived a hurricane. She was wearing a polyester uniform with a name tag that read diner staff. She kicked off her orthopedic shoes and tossed $40 in crumpled bills onto the coffee table. "A guy threw a drink at me today because his fries were cold," she snapped. Kenneth stared at the small pile of cash and grumbled that it would not even cover the late fee. He still called himself a visionary, claiming he was overqualified for manual labor while strategizing a comeback that would never happen. While they argued over $40 and a frozen lasagna, the sun was shining on the other side of the city. The gates of the Palo Alto estate were wide open for the first time in decades. There were no security guards checking identities. Instead, there was a new bronze plaque on the stone pillar that read, "The Eleanor Vance Center for Financial Literacy and Youth Empowerment." I stood on the balcony of the master bedroom, watching the transformation below. The manicured lawn was now filled with picnic tables, where students from the inner city were sitting with tablets, learning how to code. I have come to realize that real justice is not always a gavel banging in a courtroom. There is a difference between the justice of punishment, which only looks at the past, and the justice of the seed sower, which focuses on building the future. By turning that mansion into a sanctuary for others, I made the family's cruelty seem small and meaningless. I was not just reclaiming what was stolen, I was using my victory to create a value that would last long after they were forgotten. I have come to realize that freedom has a price tag attached to it. It costs you your past, it costs you the illusion of safety, and it costs you the people who claim to love you only when you were useful. But as I looked at the vibrant life filling the grounds, I knew it was a bargain. People say family is everything, that you should forgive blood no matter how much it bleeds you dry. They are wrong. Family is not a biological accident. It is a choice and a circle of mutual respect. When that circle is broken, you have to walk out of it to survive. If you find yourself in a similar situation, if you are the one always at the edge or treated like a burden while you keep everyone else afloat, remember this. Your dignity has a market value, and you should never offer a discount. You are not a liability. You are the architect of your own worth. Audit your life today and stop financing people who cannot afford to respect you. Do not be afraid to pull the plug on a toxic legacy to find yourself. Because the ultimate victory is not seeing them fail, it is seeing yourself thrive without them. If you have found the courage to set your own boundaries, or if you are still looking for it, share your story in the comments. Let us remind each other that it is okay to choose yourself. Do not forget to like and share this video so we can help more Black sheep find their way home.